What's up, hobby friends, and welcome to the vlog video for July. The month was pretty good for me in terms of productivity. It started off a little bit on the rougher side, just in terms of my mental creative space. I was focusing more on building and working on terrain, as well as working on building models, less so on army painting. Although with the impending release of the Horus Heresy at the start of the month, I more or less had to sort of knuckle down, force my way through working through some of my backlog in terms of army projects. And the goal was to essentially be able to start the Horus Heresy project, really only having Marvel projects, so personal and commission, as well as the Horus Heresy stuff to work on. I don't do well multitasking, and I wanted to avoid a situation where I had 3 or 4 different projects on the go simultaneously. It would have been too much backlog to have to just have sitting on my plate, and I think it would have stressed me a lot more. So I'm really happy with my productivity this month. In terms of my goals, I think I accomplished what I wanted to in terms of finishing off my Necrons, finishing off my Nighthaunt editions, and I'm in a good place now where I think I'm ready to keep working on Marvel projects as well as diving full on into the Horus Heresy. So let me show you what I actually got painted this month. I'll show you what I've got lined up for the next month or two, and then we'll talk briefly about my content creation goals, what I've got done, what I've got planned, and I think my roadmap for the next little bit. So this is what I managed to get painted this month. I have the Reanimator, which honestly, if you've been following my socials, has been something I've been plugging away on throughout the month of May. Actually, I finished this up right at the beginning of the month of June, and it was one of those projects where I know I'm probably never going to use it, and even though I'm adding it to my Necrons, it's a cool piece to have. I think the fact that it's so awful on the tabletop and the fact that it's probably never going to see play really did hamper or impact the motivation to actually want to work on this. Even with the thing finished, it is tabletop quality. I know compared to some of my other Necron vehicles, it's not my best work, or it's not at the same sort of level of quality. But just to have in the collection, it's not the end of the world. I'm also not terribly happy with the base colors. I did end up having to change the color recipe, largely because, at least for my older Necron pieces, I was using Games Workshop paints for the mix along with some P3, and I don't want to have or buy more of those paints to maintain sort of the palette for working on my Necrons. So I tried to experiment with different colors using Vallejo's and AK Interactive paints. It's similar, the color's not quite the same. It is a touch brighter, so maybe at some point I want to go back and darken it a bit, but for now it's done. I have some Marvel models as well. A little close up there. So we have, I always mix up the two. I think it's Honey Badger, X23, and then Electra. These are for my client, part of our Wave 4. We have a good enough relationship. I feel that he's very understanding in terms of, at least as an artist, what I'm currently struggling with for sort of a creative block, and just, I want to make sure that I'm producing the best work I can for him. He's not in any critical hurry to get this wave painted and sent over to him. So we're sort of just tackling it as I go, and when I feel the urge or the motivation to paint some Marvel models for him, I'll pull them out, largely wanting to make sure that I paint up some good quality models for him. I also struggled with these two in particular. Honey Badger and X23 are probably my least favorite sculpts that they've produced so far, and that also impacted my drive or motivation to want to paint them. But they're done, and I can move on. One of the other biggest projects I've been working on for this month is updating my Nighthaunt, both as a way so that I can actually have painted models to show off for my Nighthaunt 2.0 recap, more on that later, but also because I do want to expand my army, expand my collection with some of the new models they've released, adding some models that I think got a huge boost or a buff in the new book, things I don't have in my collection. And as I already mentioned, this is something that I don't like balancing multiple projects. So I wanted to make sure that I got these guys done before I started to really deep dive into the Horus Heresy before I started to paint my Blood Angels. I didn't want to have a situation where I was working on Marvel, working on this Necron piece of shit, my Nighthaunt, as well as the Horus Heresy. So my goal for this month really has been finishing up old projects, rounding up collections, and making sure that I don't have too many things outstanding, at least insofar as 40K and Age of Sigmar are concerned. What I've added to the collection really, in terms of new models, All Rock the Drowner, gorgeous model. I think this is probably my favorite model in the Nighthaunt range, right alongside the Black Coach, and for sure in the first few iterations of my list, I'm definitely going to be fielding him. And then alongside him, in terms of new models, I also painted up the Scriptor Mortis. Cool model. I think he's great on paper. I think it's just hard to fit him in to more general army builds. He's, I think, a very specific character that fits in a very specific build. So one for the collection. Hey, Charles. One for the collection, but not necessarily going to see the tabletop quite as much. I've also got 10 of the new Craven Throne Guard. I wasn't a huge fan of these models when they were first shown on the Warhammer community sort of trailer, teaser, whatever. I thought the crossbows looked a little dinky, especially when you compare them to the Cruel Boy bolt thrower guys, who have these massive, the bolt thrower crossbow things. I felt these looked a little dinky, and my original plan was to actually 3D print crossbow replacements, but everything I'd found online basically looked the same. Crossbows are crossbows, and so I was like, fuck it, we'll just paint these 10 up. I was hoping they would be good. I bought them and built them before the book was released, and then I ended up painting them within a week of the release of the book. So as I was painting them, I knew that they were garbage, and I'll talk about them more in my Nighthaunt video coming later this month. I am very disappointed in the actual unit itself, but I think once painted, they look pretty good. And so it's just a cool unit to have in the collection for completion's sake. And then finally, I painted up 10 Hex Wraiths. So on paper, these guys got probably one of the biggest boosts in the new book. And I really wanted to add 2 units of them, 2 units of 5 to my army. I'm not a huge fan of the models. I think they are quite dated. I believe these were released probably around 7th, 8th edition fantasy. So when you compare them to the newer Nighthaunt sculpts, they sort of sit in between that Soulblight undead skeleton vibe and then half the ghost vibe. So when you actually compare them to something like the Dreadblade Harrow or even the Knight of Shrouds on Steed, you can sort of see just the huge jump in style and quality that I really wish the Hex Wraiths had. So things like the sculpting on the bones, in particular of the horse and the rib cage and the hooves and the feet, they're much clearer, much crisper on these new models. Whereas if you actually look at the older models, they're not that good. It's a lot of fuzziness. It's a lot of sort of half-hearted sculpts. You can see just how sloppy it is in the rib cage. And then even in the back, and you can see the terrible paint job I've done painting for the tabletop. Just the way that they were sculpted and cast, there's a lot of muddiness to them that I really didn't enjoy when you compare them, especially to how crisp these new models are. And I guess that's sort of just, I don't know if it's been a decade, but I'm calling it a decade's worth of improvement in terms of sculpting and casting technology. So I definitely hit a bit of a roadblock painting these guys. I think it ended up taking me, I would say, probably 2 weeks. A lot of it was just spent doing the bone. It doesn't seem like there's a lot, but it is quite a lot. And then I'm also not a huge fan of the flames. I have painted these before in the past. I had 10 in my old Vampire Counts army. And even back then, I wasn't quite as happy with them. When I built them as Hex Wraiths. So without the barding, they have the Hex Wraith legs. And I didn't actually like the silhouette of them. I felt they looked like they were a little too flimsy. The horse felt a little too small. And so when I built them this time around, I ended up adding the barding from the Black Knights to at least get the lower torso feeling a little chunkier. And I think it makes the horse silhouette feel much beefier, much larger. And I think it's certainly an improvement over the Hexwraith build. Not the greatest, but I can live with the way they are now. I also ended up painting the flames in more of an orange-yellow actual fire look. When I painted them originally, I had them in green, similar to the ghosty bits. And when I say originally painted, I meant when I painted the first 10 for my Vampire Counts army. And it ended up being a lot of blue and bone, not a lot of contrast, not a lot of color. With this Nighthaunt army, I wanted them to be a little bit more colorful. And so in combination with that sort of balance between the ghost blue and the fleshy robe color, along with the autumn base, I wanted to have a bit of that orange and yellow mirrored up top. And I think it works very, very well in terms of the color balance. I did the same thing for these newer models with the Scriptor Mortis and with Allrock. I painted their flames and little lanterns in actual fire, as opposed to a more ghostly blue or green like Games Workshop did for their studio models. So I think looking back at sort of my projects, what I got painted for this month, my productivity, I'm actually really happy with what I've actually painted, even if the quality of the individual models outside of the Marvel and my two heroes, the stuff in the back is a lot of tabletop quality paint jobs. And what I mean is it looks great from that 3, 4, 5 feet away. The paint jobs are consistent with more or less what I've done for my existing models. Up close, nothing really fancy to write home about. They're not going to win any painting contests. But I think from a creative standpoint, it was actually really nice to be able to just put paint on the models. I'm not recording any of it. There's no expectation that I'm entering them in a painting contest. And so the expectation of quality isn't, these are supposed to be award-winning level of paint jobs. But I think it's important to recognize that you don't have to paint your models all of the same quality, especially if the intended purpose for these is just to play games with them. If they look good on the tabletop and they fit into your existing army, I think that's good enough. And I think there's something to be said about the lack of expectation for quality. To just be able to push paint around on the model, not really care if my blends are perfectly smooth, to not really care if I'm necessarily always painting within the lines, especially with these bone horses. Maybe in the close-ups you'll see the hooves aren't always the crispest, and so I try and pick out the details, but if I overpaint into some of the seams a little bit and the wash is a little sloppy or the highlight ends up just being a little not smoothly blended, I'm starting to ramble a bit, I'm realizing. Really what I'm meaning to say is sometimes you just need a creative break and to not paint with any expectations or any pressures. And being able to produce a decent quality of work in abundance, what I feel here is abundance, for me helps to just reset my creative approach. It resets my mental, and I'm feeling a lot better now, moving into the month of July, looking to tackle models where I do want to spend that time and that quality. I'll be painting up a couple of more models for the commission. I'm focusing on my Black Order and then starting the Horus Heresy as well. Having that balance continually of having some army projects to work on while simultaneously working on display models and being able to bounce back and forth, I think is something I do need to incorporate into my workflow, just to be able to manage my expectations and to manage at least the pressures I'm placing on myself. So as I'm recording this, this is actually a week before the end of the month, but because of the way that the weeks line up, this vlog and the 1st of July actually falls, I believe, on the Thursday or the Friday. So I still actually have about 5 days of painting left in the month of June. So depending on how productive I end up being, I may actually finish up a bulk of the Black Order, but because they won't be painted for the video at the time of publishing, I'm going to count them towards the next month. hashtag cheating. But essentially, these are my goals for the next month plus a week. So starting from the right, in terms of Marvel, my goal is to get all of the Black Order done. So it's 6 models plus Thanos. We have Maw, Proxima Midnight, Glaive, Black Dwarf, Supergiant, Black Swan, and then of course the titler Thanos as the leader of the affiliation. For the commission, I'm aiming to get Nick Fury and the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well as the Shadowlands Daredevil done. The Shadowland Grunt Ninjas that came with Elektra and Daredevil still need quite a bit of repair. I need to source some parts and materials to try and fix them. If I can get them repaired, I'm going to try and get them done as well for this month, get sort of that whole set done. But if I can't, that may end up being pushed to August. Now, for my Heresy stuff, so this is what I've got built so far. Yeah, whatever. I still have the Spartan and the Contemptor from the box set waiting to be built. The Contemptor is part of my initial 3,000 point list. The Spartan is not. So I'll probably look to build the Contemptor at some point this month. And then the vehicles, as you can see, I've got the tracks all separate because I paint them all separately. Some of the guns and sponsons aren't glued in yet, especially on the Kratos. And then on the Rhino, these sponsons are all separate, tracks are separate. I've done a bit of 3D printing on the army. Some of the models are mostly plastic with a little bit of bits, and then some of them are almost entirely resin, and that was not intentional. So I picked up, or I wanted to pick up the core set with the intention of building a lot of Ultramarines. My previous experience with Heresy was essentially a lot of veterans and rhinos, and while I'm not a particular fan of jump infantry, the Blood Angels, Rite of War, and their list, especially their special units, tends to push towards jump infantry. And so while I'd originally only intended to have like 3D printed torsos, pads, and helmets to have Blood Angel iconography, and then of course 3D printed bases, to make the Assault Marines and then Dawnbreakers from the core set, I did end up printing assault arms and weapons, and as a result, it's almost entirely a resin army. I do have some Bolter Marines in the center that have plastic arms, bolters, and backpacks. I've got my converted Praetor. Everything on this armor right now is blue tacked in terms of models to the bases, and because everything's already magnetized, I think it's just easier to leave it on the tray, so can't really show that off for now. I've got a Daredale. I'm giving him a Vulcan Falconites. I've got some assault cannons printed up. He's going to be a bit of an anti-infantry guy. And then I've got Sanguinius. I did end up 3D printing a new base for him. Took a bit of tries. I think this is the 3rd or 4th iteration to get the angle right and then to have all the details printing clearly and crisply. There were a few misprints because I didn't place supports properly. But basically, I wanted the army to have a Zone Mortalis base and color scheme. And the base that Sanguinius comes with is sort of like an urban, almost demonic homeworld sort of urban rubble debris, whatever thing. It's supposed to go with the seating base with a demon. I didn't like that at all, so I wanted to have something that matched the rest of my army. So the actual army itself, I'm going for a fairly simple color scheme. I want the army to paint up very quickly, look striking on the tabletop, and not take a whole lot of time. This is the test scheme, or I guess the test model I printed up to test the color scheme, as well as to test some parts to make a Saturnine Terminator. So the list itself, and I'll cover this more probably in a later video once I actually paint the army, is a Jump Pack Praetor. I think I have a Chaplain in there, a couple of Apothecaries, 3 of them, a big blob of Assault Marines, 10 Tactical Marines and a Rhino, 2 squads of 10 Dawnbreakers. And then I'm starting with the Day of Sorrow's Rite of War. So I'll be taking some Crimson Paladins, 3 squads of 3 for now. And I'm not a huge fan of the Cataphracti. I don't like the Foretold ones. And so my solution is to try and convert some Tartaros into Saturnine Terminators. Get sort of that really armored, beefy profile without resolving to using Cataphracti models. So that turns out well. Really, the only parts I need to print up are the shield, the shoulder pads, and a new weapon. So he won't have a hammer, I'll have swords and spears. I just need to source some Tartaros legs and bodies. And then the base, I think right now, there's a bit of a separation between the turquoise of the base and the red of the model. I think I need to do some glazing to try and tie the two together, get some reds into the base or some blues into the model, or maybe greens. I don't know yet. I still need to play around. My goal for this month is probably to nail down the color recipe and then start cranking out the infantry. If I can get all the infantry done, I can basically focus on the army itself in terms of the fun models, like the vehicles, the characters, the dreadnoughts, the tanks, and yeah. In terms of video content that I'll be working on for this month, so for Patreon, I'm going to be releasing a longer video that covers all 6 of the Black Order. And rather than do 6 individual videos, I wanted to combine them all into one because all 6 of them do share common elements across, and I don't want to call it a uniform, but essentially the uniform that they wear does share common themes. White elements or white armor, the black cloth and or suit, some of the non-metal elements, and then maybe some yellow detailing are shared across all 6 of them. And rather than have 6 videos that cover a lot of the same thing, I thought it would be much more efficient to have one long video, cover the common elements before diving into the individual components that sets each model apart. So that'll be released on Patreon. And then I'll be recording Thanos, but he will probably be released on YouTube. This is a longer month, 5 weeks, I believe it is. So I have, of course, the vlog video planned. I do have a video for my Nighthaunt. So this is mainly covering the new battle tome that was released. Less of a tactics video, more a general impression of the book, sort of what I like about it, what I don't like. Be a cool way to show off the additions to my collection, how I'm growing my army, and then give you a sense of my first iteration of the army, what I'm taking, why I'm taking it, and how I'm going to approach playing the new edition or the new season of the game with the battle tome, and then move on from there. I'm not playing a lot of tournaments or events, so this is more just a casual approach and sort of just an update on where I am with the army. I'm also going to be releasing a couple of videos covering the individual affiliations I play for Marvel Crisis Protocol. So for sure, off the top of my head, I will be doing Convocation, A-Force, and Web Warriors. Those are my 3 main affiliations. I think they offer a different approach or a different style to playing the game, although they have some similarities because I do end up taking similar models across all 3 affiliations. So again, I don't play a lot of events. I'm not going to proclaim to be some top-end competitive player. So this is more just a way for me to show off my collection for each of those affiliations, talk about why I got into each of the affiliations, how I approach the game with playing them, and then sort of give an idea of how I build rosters, pick my crises and tactics cards, just to give a bit of a well-rounded insight for people who may be considering these affiliations, whether they're playing for casual or gearing more for competitive play. And you can sort of just expand your knowledge with other people's experiences. I think those will also be pretty fun to record, and it'll take a bit of pressure off of me having to constantly paint a lot for tutorial videos. One of the things I'm struggling with in terms of volume is recording. It's almost between 8 to 10 videos a month of how-tos. I don't mind doing it for Patreon because it's 3 or 4 videos, but for YouTube especially, it can be a bit of struggle because, at least for Patreon, if the videos are like an hour and a half, 2 hours, people are watching the videos with the expressed intention to learn. And so they are looking for a long form video that covers how to paint a model from start to finish. For YouTube, it ends up having to be shorter content. 10 to 20 minutes seems to be a reasonable length. And at least for myself, where I am now, I am struggling to paint and record a lot of content that ends up being compressed without breaking it up necessarily into 4 or 5 different videos. While they can work, I feel like piecemeal releasing them tends to feel bad on my part. I want to release the content for it all at once. So I'm going to be playing around with different forms of content, whether it's tactics or something more entertainment related. I don't know yet. Something I may look into doing as well is scaling back the amount of videos I end up releasing for YouTube. I'm going to be reflecting on it probably for the next at least couple of weeks, maybe the next few months, leading more towards the fall or potentially into the new year. I may revisit my YouTube strategy for reasons beyond just the content creation schedule, but I'll dive into that more in the future and as I actually sort of figure out where I want to take my channel. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. And I hope it just gives you a little bit more insight into not just my creative process, but the struggles that I'm currently working through, that I'm trying to overcome, and the fact that even for an artist like me, everything I produce isn't always top shelf competition level. Sometimes I do just want to work on very simple army projects that don't have any sort of expectations of high-end quality stuff. I'm not looking to really show off. And sometimes I just want to paint for the tabletop. I want to paint for models that I'll just be pushing across the table as I roll dice, and not necessarily focusing or being caught up in always producing high quality work. It can be a good way to reset creativity and to sort of rejuvenate, at least for me, the motivation to work on stuff that is supposed to be higher quality, things like the Marvel commissions, etc. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a like, make sure you subscribe for more awesome weekly content. And if you want to follow my other social media platforms, I'll make sure to have links in the video description below. As always, until next time, happy hobbying.